In 1974, I read a book by Annie Dillar called Pilgrim at Tinker Creek. She has a little quote in there that says, when she was young, she used to hide money, pennies, and draw arrows and say, free money this way, and she'd hide in the bushes and say, she said, since the world is planted in pennies, cast broadside from a generous hand, who is so malnourished that they won't stoop to pick up a penny? She says, it's that simple. What you see is what you get. I discovered there's a corollary to that. What you seek is what you see.
Welcome back, everyone. This is the Sparks of Gratitude podcast. I am your host, Randy Sparks, and we have a special guest today, Mr. Al Switzler. Welcome to the show.
Well, I'm glad to be here, Randy.
Well, if you don't know Al Switzler, you may know some of his work, but he's famous for Crucial Conversations, a book that is world famous, translated into many languages, and has transformed the lives of a lot of people and a lot of organizations, helping people focus on those crucial conversations in your life. And we'll probably touch on that a little bit, but much more than that, Al is a wonderful father, philanthropist, and just a great human and full of gratitude. And we're going to have a conversation about that today. So we're happy to have you here, Al.
Well, I'm happy to be here. I just want to add to the praise you all receive, you and Kathy's work on gratitude, the resources that you provide people. You're impacting a lot of lives. That's terrific.
Well, we really hope to. That's the idea. And it started with other people impacting our lives and encouraging us to do something to improve ourselves. And we thought, can we pay that forward? And so we love the principle and practice of gratitude. And so we've tried to give the gift of gratitude to other people. So
that's excellent.
Yeah. And I always have a hard time doing this, but everybody, if you like what you're listening to, remember you can watch this on YouTube or listen to this on your podcast. But if you like it, please let us know. Subscribe to it, like it. Tell us what you think about it and share it with your friends. It really means a lot. And then we can get more good guests like Al. So let's learn a little bit about Al. I know a little bit about him. I met him first maybe a decade ago, and over bits and pieces there and reading your books. I have an insight to some things, but I'd like maybe you to share a little bit about your background and also how gratitude has been an impactful principle in your life.
I have a wonderful life. A wonderful wife for whom I'm grateful, children, grandchildren, friends, colleagues, partners. I mean, I think that's the first thing that a lot of people think about when they think about gratitude.
People.
Is all of those people that helped you become who you are and where you are. And I am thankful for that. I do have a little bit of an unusual upbringing, personal history. The easiest way to say it is that I'm the illegitimate son of a teenage orphan named Jones who has no living relatives. My mother had a hard life. She became an orphan when she was about 12, and they split her family up, her siblings, to different orphanages, and they really didn't make too much contact after that. It's really interesting. My mother kind of tried to survive until I was about 3. And these are kind of her stories, right? She ran away. When she was in the orphanage, she grew up. She made a living babysitting around the community. And when she was 17, she ran away from the orphanage and got pregnant and had me. And when I was about 3, I don't know much about between me, birth and 3, she ran away to a small town, Uravan, Colorado, part of the Manhattan Project, out in the middle of nowhere, population 800. She struggled, and by her count, she fostered me out to 22 different homes. That's her count. And I remember that some were good and some were bad. But if I look back on that time, the one thing that I was most grateful for is I had teachers who cared for me. This was my safe place. It made such a difference because, every month or 2 or 3, I would go with my box and bag to another foster home, informal foster home, right? But teachers in school was just wonderful, wonderful place. I think that impacted the rest of my life. I think that's why I became a scholar. because of that. When I was 10, my mother married, and so I got a stepdad, my only dad, Bruce Switzler, and he was wonderful to me, and they started having a family, and we had some wonderful experiences when I was just new to that family. By the way, my mother had my brother 2 months after I moved in with him, and Bruce said, "Hold out your hands," and I held out my hands, and he put a .22 rifle in one hand and a fly rod in the other and said, "This is what we do. You're a Switzler now." And we had some wonderful experiences. I'm grateful for all of those. We moved to Grand Junction out in the country, and a man named Lark Washburn, who was really good to us and to me for years. My dad was hired to be the ranch foreman of Lark's ranch. He had 4 sections, 2,600 acres, Appaloosa horses, and it was a great life. And then driving to pick up some cattle at an auction that Lark had bought some cattle at, my dad, Bruce, was put in the hospital with carbon monoxide poisoning. Found out that he had stage 4 leukemia. And so he didn't last very long. That was a dark time for me. I got bitter. I certainly quit counting blessings.
And how old would you have been then?
14. 15 was a tough year, but I got out of it. That was because I had coaches and teachers and friends who were members of the LDS Church. It was really interesting. I had a lot of friends who were not members of the LDS Church, but they so respected me that they didn't invite me to their parties. They invited me to hunt and fish and, go to movies and whatnot. But if there were, and it was 60s, right? I mean, there were drugs and alcohol. I didn't go. They didn't invite me. I thought I'm grateful for that, and grateful for friends, and grateful for parents who helped me stay on track. Somewhere along the line, I went to BYU. I got married. I got educated. I had a profession. I just count blessing after blessing after blessing. Let me pause a little bit on a few things and talk some about gratitude that I think makes a difference to me in my life. I have a framed cross-stitched quote from William Carlos Williams, who was an American poet. He was a country physician, and between patients for 30, 40 years, he'd write little short poems. He has a quote that says, "Poetry is the stuff for the lack of which people die miserably every day." And I thought about that, and I thought, I don't want to die miserably. So I've found poetry in lots of different ways, whether it's, sunset glow on Mount Timpanogos, or an act of kindness, or a pretty bird. I mean, there's just, music. There's lots of ways that you can not die miserably. I thought about the fact that gratitude is the stuff for the lack of which people live miserably. If you don't have gratitude, you don't have joy. I mean, it's chicken and the egg. Which comes first? I think gratitude comes before joy. In 1974, I read a book by Annie Dillar called Pilgrim at Tinker Creek. And she said, I'm going to go out for a year and just look at things on Tinker Creek and see what I can find. She has a little quote in there that says, when she was young, she used to hide money, pennies, and draw arrows and say, free money this way. And she'd hide in the bushes and say, people would come and they'd look down and say, pennies. She said, since the world is planted in pennies, cast broadside from a generous hand, who is so malnourished that they won't stoop to pick up a penny? She says, it's that simple, since the world is just full of pennies, right? What you see is what you get. And I think that's the case for seeing. But I discover there's a corollary to that. What you see, what you seek is what you see. So I think that's where, your emphasis and work with journaling. Journaling is a way to count. When you seek and journal and count, then you see your blessings. I think there's a fellow a pastor named Michael Brown, who does an attitude of gratitude sermon. And in that he talks about a lady who's got really bad depression. It's not chemical. Drugs aren't going to help it. And she starts journaling. And it's negative, 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 negative. And then her counselor says, no, you write at the bottom of every page one good thing. And so every day she would find one good thing. And then she had the bright idea. She would take a yellow marker and highlight it. And some days it was really hard to find that one good, but she would highlight it. And then she found, I'll just go through and read the highlighted. I think we need to seek by putting metaphorically, yellow highlighters on things so we can seek and count our blessings. I have a good friend named Cal Wick. He's lives in Delaware. Sorry, Cal. He's an entrepreneur, recently retired. He's a humanitarian, and he's ordained Episcopal priest for like 40 years. Priest. He was reading Abram Hessel's book, Sabbath, and he said, I learned some really good things there, but one of the things he does is his Sabbath is Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And in his Sabbath, he only gives prayers of thanksgiving. He holds his petitions off for Monday through Thursday. Can you imagine if you count 3 days of counting blessings only? I've trained myself intentionally that when I see good things, poetry in all of its forms, mentally I say, see what God hath wrought. See what God hath wrought. All of those are ways of seeking to see. They're counting. I know for a surety that blessings you don't count, don't count. I've tried very hard to learn how to count blessings.
It sounds to me, Al, that you've been somehow practicing that ever since you were a little boy, because how you described, you came from every excuse to not have a good life. And even in your childhood, going through these foster situations for 42 or however many that were, and different homes and different teachers and back and forth, and seeing, well, how great that was, what an opportunity that was. That seems like that's the attitude you're describing it.
And again, you see what God hath wrought. I mean, clearly you can't come out of my background without feeling blessed. I think Teddy Roosevelt gets credit for it, but it says comparison is the thief of joy. Comparison can be the thief of gratitude. As I thought about that, I said, comparison can be part of counting. If you're comparing yourself with envy, you tend to get bitter. If you're not counting, you tend to be blind or numb. If you're comparing what was with where you are, if you're comparing the improvement, if you're comparing the growth, if you're comparing the abundance where there was a lack of it, then I think that's a key to blessing. I have a little story about comparison I'd love to share.
Go for it. I want to hear it.
Well,
I have my thoughts, but
for those of you who don't know, Andy and Kathy live on the foothills of Mount Timpanogos. People love Mount Timpanogos. I have a good friend who was the director of the Springfield Art Museum for years, Vern Swanson. And as people would come to the art shows, you could hear him say, I like that and I don't like that. I like that and I like that and I don't like that. And he'd go and say, well, tell me about it. And they'd say, well, I know what I like. I know what I like. Vern said people would have been more accurate if they said, I like what I know. My mom was not a Mount Timpanogos mom. My mom, after Bruce died, I'm sure she got depressed. She was a horrible cook and a horrible house cleaner. She was a hoarder. She was angry. She smoked, and because she was LDS, she felt bad about it all the time and berated herself. My friends had Mount Timpanogos mothers. They were well-dressed. They cleaned house. They were great cooks. And my mom was an Ochre Mountain mom. I mean, as I've thought about that, the Ochre Mountains are 15 or 20 miles that way. I thought as this point about Vern saying, I like what I know. It'd be better if I know I like what I know. I said, I should know something about the Ochre Mountains. And, this Timpanogos, it's got a ski resort, it's famous, camp, hike, ski, 11,763 feet. Nobody knows anything about the Ochres. So I said, I want to find something about the Ochres. No, they have 10 peaks over 10,000 feet. If they were in any other state, there would be 37 states. Those would be the 10 highest peaks. They would have ski resorts, they would have all kinds of stuff. I thought to that, shame on me. As I thought about it and grew over the years to know my mom, one of the things that surprised me is I called my mother mother. My friends called her mom because they saw that she was friendly and smiley and a great listener and served them. I couldn't see that. I couldn't count that as blessings. But over the years, I came to know my mother a lot better and appreciate the fact that I needed to have gratitude, that I did appreciate all that she had done for me, all that she had gone through, all that she had survived from. And yet people that knew my mom better than I knew during those years were dear friends, would have done anything for my mother. But it took me a while to learn that I'm going to be more grateful if I can actually know and learn and discover. I think that's part of counting too. So when we count at that level, we're more likely to be grateful.
Yeah. And when did that awareness come and intentionality to begin to know more and lean in that way?
Well, unfortunately, it didn't come until I matured. I wish it would have come a lot earlier. When I moved away and go to school at BYU, I went back one summer. Then after my sophomore year, I'd just go back for little visits. So I never really got to know. After I got married and had kids and wanted my mother to know, I'd take my kids back. And so then I'd go visits more. And over a period of years where I would then say, well, tell me about this, Mother. Tell me about my dad. Tell me about my real dad. Tell me about, your upbringing. Tell me about what it meant to be an orphan, etc. When my mother passed away about 20 years ago, and during those years that she was sick, I spent a lot of time and one-on-ones and, conversations that had tears associated with them. And so I'm happy to say that the relationship was wonderful and deep, and I'm grateful for it, but I'm not so happy to say that it took a lot of time and maturity on my part, that if I'd have leaned in earlier, I would have had many more years of gratitude.
And how have you taken some of these lessons and implemented them going forward to be intentional? You sound extremely intentional, and you notice things, you see things, you're counting those blessings in your way. And how has that begun? How do you implement that with yourself and your family and your relationship with your own kids?
There's in the LDS hymn, there's two great gratitude anthems, right? 2:19, count your many blessings. 2:41, because I have been given much, I too must give. The counting the blessings, I think we've already talked about, and there's a lot of intentional ways of doing that. And again, I'd iterate that blessings you don't count. Because I have been given much, I too must give is a great anthem, because I think there's lots of ways that you can give. I know widows in my own ward for the last many, many years that to some teenage boy will give a talk, including my own, right? And there'll be a phone call. May I speak to Todd? Oh, it was such a wonderful talk, and I particularly like this part, and thank you so much. And boy just beams, and there's someone who may not have been given much in terms of financial resources, but certainly has been given much in terms of giving heart, time, wisdom. So there's lots that we can give. And a number of years ago, Mike Carter and I, as we were looking to retire, we had a little experience where I was talking to my wife, Linda, saying in the morning, let me share some results I just got in the mail over some of the humanitarian projects that we'd been a little part of, like Elevar and Unite Us, helping women and their children get out of poverty around the world. At the end of that, she said, that's all really good. What are we doing in our own community? Same day I had lunch with Mike Carter, and Mike Carter said that he was driving into Pleasant Grove and saw the sign, and mentally, besides Welcome to Pleasant Grove, down at the bottom, he saw what wasn't there. In reality, he said, entering a no-hunger zone. Because of those experiences and because of experiences we both had in our youth, there were times when twice a day I would eat mayonnaise and Wonder Bread sandwiches. We decided to say, let's see what we need. And so as we looked around, we found that Utah Food Bank told us that American Fork and Pleasant Grove at that time, that's more than 10 years ago, the biggest food desert in the state. So we formed with our good friend Wendy Osborne in Spanish Fork, Tabitha's Way. In American Fork, we serve the 10 cities in North Utah County. That's a long way of saying there's lots of ways to give, but because I have been given much, I too must give. When I look back on my own upbringing, I'm grateful for the things that I now have that I didn't have. And one of the ways you express gratitude, besides the thank yous and the smiles, and there's so many ways of doing that, and acts of kindness and acts of service, is you can say, what can I do to help people who are really struggling? And that's what Tabitha's Way does. We help individuals and families through tough times. You can imagine the tough times of violence and divorce and job loss and cancer and, chemotherapy, all of those things that cause people to have to make a decision. Am I going to pay my medical bill or pay my rent? Am I going to pay my rent or buy food? I mean, they have lots of those. And so it's just a way of, Tabitha's Way for me is a way of expressing gratitude through action and not just through words.
That's impressive. Pablo Picasso has a quote, something like, about meaning of life is finding your gift and then the rest of your life giving it away.
Exactly.
Something like that.
I know that quote. I do. That's a good one.
And it seems like you've spent a life learning and seeing and creating something good, and you have so many blessings. You've created something that's impacted so many people, and you're doing your part to give back. And I want to learn a little bit more about Tabitha's Way specifically. You talk about it and how that helps, but what specifically is Tabitha's Way, and how can people help with that as well?
Well, again, Tabitha's Way is a 501c3. We have a physical location, and from there, people can come and shop every 2 weeks.
Is it like a
grocery store?
Grocery store.
Yeah. They don't pay anything to get it. They do have to have an intake interview, and our mission, by the way, is to help individuals, families through tough times by providing temporary food assistance. A lot of people think that people really abuse the system, but 75% of our clients come 4 months or less, and they're back on their feet. We provide resources for self-reliance, and we help neighbors help neighbors. We couldn't do this without neighbors. We now, just in the north here, we have over 1,200 hours of volunteer work every month. These are lovely, caring people who can give their time because that's what they have to give. They have big hearts, and people also give money because we're almost independent. We're part of a network with the Utah Food Bank, which is part of Feeding America, Feeding America has 200 food banks, 60,000 food pantries. In Utah, we have one food bank and over 200 food pantries. It's satisfying work. It's complicated work. There's a lot of moving pieces. A couple of years ago, we were serving 4,000 or 5,000 people a month, individuals. That's not shoppers. That's, just divide that by 4, 1,000 households a month. The last couple of months, we've done 10,000 because the need's so much greater, and inflation is now. We have volunteers who used to serve a few years ago come, and they're so embarrassed, and they look down at their shoes and say, I never thought this would happen, but now I need the service. And they'll come for 3 or 4 months until they get their self-reliance back on their feet, and they'll also help other people, So it's just a circle of caring. So
your capacity to be able to work and make such an impact with Tabitha's Way, in part came from work that you'd done previously that has given you the resources and the time to be able to do that. And that comes back to what eventually became a profitable and successful company. And that, to me, has been impactful because this is, books that I've read that you've written. But all of that still rewinds back to you having good teachers. These are the assumptions that I have, that you had impactful people in your life that sparked the belief in yourself and capacity for learning. And you went to maybe talk about your interest in organizational change and behavior.
Yeah, when I went to BYU, I went because a number of LDS parents and one German teacher at the high school said, "You're going to college, aren't you?" And I said, well, I hadn't really thought about it. I didn't think I could. They helped me do the paperwork, helped me get in, and I went to BYU on a math scholarship. I got bored stiff, so I changed to be an English major. And after I graduated in English, my wife and I took a teaching fellowship at the University of Kentucky where I got my master's and studied with the poet Wendell Berry. I thought I was going to be a poet. Then when I was trying to figure out what I was going to do, I went down and taught for 3 years at Auburn University. And while there, I was able to teach a number of different classes, including some on organizational change and behavior. And so then I went to upstate New York to do doctoral studies in influence and organizational behavior. A big difference in my life. I aimed, you use the word intentional. I was very intentional at doing, and then I got hired at BYU in the School of Management. It was all wonderful. Again, knock on wood, count your blessings, see what God hath wrought. I just so appreciative that I was able to do that work, because it was really a learning experience for me that helped me prepare, the 11 years that I was a professor, the 30 years that I was an entrepreneur. Now, if I want to pause and count my blessings for the entrepreneurial work, Gary Patterson, Joseph Grenny, and Ron McMillan and I met in a Volkswagen Vanagon at a pizza place in Provo in the shade outside eating fast food. We said, what if we could do this and this and this and this and this? The blessings of having good colleagues and partners and collaborators, I can't understate it. I mean, there's a certain amount of synergy and caring and filling in and supporting, and we were so fortunate and so blessed to be able to do that. Created a company. It's called the Praxis Group first, and then Vitality Alliance, and then we got Vital Smarts. And we did the research and trained a lot of people and tested a lot of people with a lot of people. We knew that we had viable results. We could get viable results. And we trained hundreds of thousands of people before we wrote the books. So we knew that our principles were valid. So we wrote those books, and there's been some wide acceptance, I guess collectively our 4 books have sold about 10 million copies, but we've trained over 3 million people. And so, again, a blessing, that collaboration, and not just those 4. I mean, I don't want to go into it now, but I could just name off dozens of people who are key contributors and part of a wonderful culture where we're able to try to make a difference in many people's lives. And I think we succeeded that. I'll pause again to say, see what God hath wrought.
Well, I will tell you that I'm extremely grateful for the work that you've done, because it's impacted me. And one of the reasons I appreciate it so much is sometimes I get frustrated, and a lot of those times is when I don't know how to communicate something, or I don't know how to engage in a conversation with somebody else. Yeah. Sometimes this is the conversation in my own head. A lot of times is a conversation with my child, my coworker, my spouse. Most often it's with my spouse. I mean, that I've had the most crucial conversations the most often with my wife. And until learning tools for us to be able to engage in those, we are so much closer and more productive because of it. It's changed our life.
That's nice to hear. It's people who are listening, alternative to a crucial conversation, which is characterized by mutual purpose and mutual respect, right? People withdraw. They go hide. When they go hide, they tell themselves clever stories. Clever stories are stories we tell ourselves to justify our own bad behavior. Or we tell stories about the other people. And so one of the skills we teach is to start with heart, learn to look, master my stories, right? I mean, a lot of people then, they move to anger. So I tell people that one of the most common aerobic exercises people do is they jump to conclusions, and they make faulty assumptions, they jump to conclusions, and they get angry about it. Well, toggling between these two doesn't make for good conversation. And so we identified really from years of training and testing those results, we could teach a series of principles and skills that said, there is an alternative. You can Crucial Conversation, the subtitle, Tools for Talking When Stakes Are High. Stakes aren't high. We can do banter and small talk and play games. We can do it. But when they really matter, that's when you need to have a crucial conversation.
It's making me think of a couple things. One, I've spent a lot of time defining and outlining and learning what my core values are, what are most important to me. And at the very top of that, you wouldn't be surprised, gratitude's one of those. Connection. Yeah. Connection is so important to me, and I realize that it's been like that ever since I was a young child. I didn't really know that until later, but meaningful connection with people is extremely valuable to me. And that's why I think these conversations are so important, and having the tools to do it are important to me. So I'd like to ask you, because I know that my relationship with my wife is deeper because we've together committed and been willing to engage in those conversations, and they're not comfortable. Like you say, when the stakes are high, we come in understanding the rules, and we'll use keywords to each other. So we know, oh, that's the place that we're going to. We're getting, in this arena, and in that arena, these are the rules of the game. Yeah. And we both agree to abide by those. So, and you can learn, so you can read the book, everybody, Crucial Conversations, and the other three that you've written, and there's TED Talks, there's things that you can find online, summaries about all these books. So we don't need to go into an exhaustive conversation about this, but I'd like to get maybe a couple tips on this. Number one, what is a crucial conversation? Maybe some examples, and some instances where you've seen successes in personal life or with people that you've coached.
A crucial conversation is identified as high stakes, strong emotion, and an opposing opinion, right? And you can put those on a continuum in terms of how serious or difficult they are. One of the points that we often make is if you're going to talk about somebody instead of to somebody, there's probably a crucial conversation you should be holding, right? If you find yourself labeling someone rather than talking to them. It comes back to that same point that if we can give that person the benefit of a doubt, right? If we can start with heart, why would a reasonable, rational, decent person be? And when it comes to our spouse, a person that I love the most, right? Is there a reason why they might do that I don't understand? I think that's one of the very first principles that start with heart. Someone's late and we're feeling picked on, and this was intentional, and why don't they know that my schedule is important as theirs are, and so when they come in, where have you been? And they say, well, I've been in the doctor, I had a wreck. If you just give yourself that space, then you can have more mutual purpose and mutual respect to have that pool of meaning where you can both play by the same set of rules.
And is that where the stories come in, where we tell ourselves a story?
During that time, rather than giving the person the benefit of a doubt, why would a reasonable, rational, decent person, you tell clever stories? Well, they're always like this. Oh, they're just like their mother or dad. Oh, they've been doing this for 10 years. Why don't they respect me? I can think of multiple times when they're not respecting me. It's really interesting that people get acculturized, in their family and friends and whatnot, to withdraw. Oh, I don't want to make waves. Or to get angry. Well, they deserve that, Well, this is how I was treated, and so this is how I treat my kids. But there are better alternatives where we don't have to suffer the consequences of these two extremes.
I hear from your books and from others who use different terminology to teach the same principles, which Brene Brown uses. She says something, the story in my head. That's one of the key words my wife and I use, is we'll look at each other and we'll say, well, the story in my head is, we'll express our clever story to the other, see if we're on or off. And sometimes we're right on. The story in my head is, you think I'm a jerk because of this. And she's like, you are correct. Yeah. No, but we know when we engage in that, we're trying to find clarity and understanding with each other.
And part of that is that you're both grateful for the fact that you have years of mutual purpose and mutual respect. You know that you have long history of that. So when you go over here and you say, well, we need to deal with this one issue or this one, you put it in that perspective. And so, you have this wealth of positive communication and actions that you're building on. You're not blowing the event up this big and the rest of it that, because that's what some people do.
And sometimes we still do, but we're trying. How do you coach people to engage in that when I may be willing to come with heart and the other party may not? How do I create a safe space to have the conversation? Isn't that one of the principles, is that create safety so that the conversation can occur?
Yeah, I don't think there's any one way to do that. I think if it's bitter, if they have a long history, if they have lots of evidence that you did this, then they almost have to start fresh. And again, it's certainly easier to coach when people have a common vocabulary, a common skill set. And that's why a lot of, not just the people at Vital Smarts, now called Crucial Learning, by the way, but, a lot of coaches, therapists, etc., why they have to create a common experience and a common vocabulary. It gives people the mutual skills, the mutual purpose to engage together. If only one person wants to engage, it's very hard. And that's where I think you just start doing acts of service, acts of love, acts of kindness, kind words, trying to create some space where you can say, at this moment, are we safe enough that we can deal with some of these issues? It's not easy unless you're both willing to engage.
Yeah, that's interesting that if one is willing, it seems you're describing, be patient, to create, to act in a way to earn some of that trust from the other party so that you can create a playing field.
Yeah, have safety to engage in the things that matter most.
And I love how you talk about common vocabulary. There's been so many times that with, partners at work, or most often with my wife, of course, but or with friends, where we'll give each other books to read. And in large part, I've given my wife a book to read, and I've asked for that specific purpose. Will you please read this book? Sometimes for nothing else and when I use these words, we'll understand each other.
Yeah, and I think that's good advice for everybody. I mean, what part of mutual don't some people understand? There's lots of ways that we can do mutual. It's really interesting that couples, after they've separated and decide to get back, right? They go get some positive experiences. Do they create a date night? Do they celebrate important events? Do they close each night with kind words? I mean, they have to create more mutual to make that connection that you think is important, I think is important. So, it's really interesting. As you were saying, that connection is so important. There are a number of people right now that think loneliness is the biggest epidemic in the world. And where you have community, whether it's a congregation or a neighborhood, I've seen a lot of people now, and bless their hearts, and I'm grateful for them, who are reaching out and trying to make more and more connections, particularly that's at risk of loneliness.
It is. We're the most connected we've ever been and the least connected we've ever been.
Exactly.
Exactly. With modern technology, and it has an effect.
Yeah.
Hey, here's the question. This might be a little bit humorous, but also come to home. Is you've spent so much time learning about yourself, about your upbringing, gaining skills and practice about conversations and coaching and connection and making a difference in people's lives. How has your family responded to this? Are they receptive? Sometimes, and I'm telling you, I might have people listen to me that aren't my kids, and then when I use the same strategies with my own family, they don't want to pay attention or listen to Dad.
Yeah, it's if we want to say we want to be humorous, and this is only semi-humorous, when I've been asked a number of hard questions in interviews over the years, I'd say, let me be clear. I just sell this stuff. I don't buy it. I try with my family too, but most of the time we're really good at conversations, and sometimes we're not. Some are better at it than others, and sometimes we're happy and sometimes we're sad. And That's just life, right? I mean, life isn't meant to have smooth sailing. This is like when you deal with hunger and food insecurity. There are a lot of people that say, I'm sure if we did this and this and this, we could just eliminate it. And I said, no, the reason it's not is because our mission is to help people through tough times. Times aren't going to go away. Cancer and chemotherapy and, the things that affect budget, where we say, do I pay my electric bill or buy food? That's not going to go away. But we can have solutions that help deal with the tough times. I think that's the same thing with connections. There's not going to be smooth sailing. There's going to be hurt feelings. There's going to be this. But in the long run, you're just doing the kinds of actions and activities and words that say, I care about you. It's nice if we're a more collective family. What can we do to be, better? And it's all about getting better and, going through life trying to deal with the bumps.
I think that intentionality and awareness is important. And I think that, to me, is the essential theme of why we're doing this podcast, period, is that life happens for us. Life isn't always a pleasure cruise.
Yeah. There's another story maybe?
Please.
Years ago, I read a story that has a title. It's called The Cape Town Grand Prix. It's by Dr. Christian Barnard, the first successful heart transplant physician. He had a clinic in South Africa, and he says most of the time there's a lot of pain, it's somber and whatnot, but one day the whole place was ruckus and full of laughter, and two young boys had hijacked a nursing cart. One was on the front steering with one foot, and the other one was the motor on the back, and the nurses were chasing, the boys were laughing. He said, I should describe the boys. The boy in the front had a couple withered arms and only one leg, and he was the driver, and the engine in the back, drunken father had thrown a lantern at this boy and pretty much burned his face off. But they're laughing. And he says the point of that is not to focus on what you've lost, to focus on what you have left. A longer story that he wrote with that, he talks about the fact that his dad hadn't learned that principle because he had an older brother who died, and the dad never got over it, and never reached out to the son that he still had. I think that what you're doing with gratitude helps people see what they have now, see what they have left, not what they've lost. I mean, you can have the perspective where you're journal keeping and all you're keeping is how empty is my cup. Or you can highlight those positive things and you can say, oh, my cup's half full. I think when you really have the perspective, when you're really working and developing gratitude, you count enough blessings that my cup runneth over. Even in tough times, you can see that your cup runneth over.
I think it's beautiful. I think that's the point. And Al, that's the best place to end. Cup runneth over.
Andy, thank you. Thank you and Kathy for all the good work you're doing.
Yeah, I appreciate you very much. And you can find Al, Tabitha's Way, and Al's books. You can improve your life by engaging in those crucial conversations, by giving, by expressing gratitude. Pick up those pennies, count those blessings. Al Switzler, you're amazing. Thank you. I'm grateful for you.
Thank you, Randy.
All right, everybody. Thank you. We'll see you next time.